Let's begin. We'll just do a very, very brief discussion of the Portuguese explorers in Asia. So as we had talked about in the last lecture, the Portuguese explorers, because of their location, where they were, because of their need for resources, and also because their desire to continue with the crusading spirit to spread Christianity to other parts of the world, were exploring and went out to the islands, the Azores, the Canary Islands near Africa, which led them to the west coast of Africa into Sierra Leone, where they started off as pretty much equal traders, and that's kind of where we left off. So the Portuguese were going to Africa, they were coming back, they were starting to get more goods because of their trading partnerships. They were also developing sugarcane plantations on the islands off of Portugal, and they were going to Africa and bringing some slaves back. Not in huge numbers yet, but they were bringing slaves back and profiting off that. So as they continue going down, what eventually happens is they get all the way to the Cape of Good Hope and go around the Atlantic Ocean in southern Africa and go into the Indian Ocean basin, which, as we had talked about before, was where China had dominated with Zheng He until 1433, and this was where kingdoms like Great Zimbabwe would trade with India, would trade with Southeast Asia and China. Now it's important to remember that Zheng He and the Chinese destroyed their ships in 1433, leaving the Indian Ocean basin, leaving that dominance behind. So what happens is, about 50, 60 years later, the Portuguese come in, and they come in and the Chinese are no longer there. No one's dominating, and that's when they come in. So the Portuguese go around the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa and make their way around. Vasco da Gama was able to go around the Cape of Good Hope from Portugal, and he was able to go explore all the way to India. So he was able to go into India. And at first the Indians don't really want to trade with him, but later on, because of military superiority, eventually the Portuguese are able to establish a whole bunch of trading posts on the coast of Africa. You can see the east coast of Africa, where we had the kingdoms of Great Zimbabwe. They were able to establish trading posts over Africa and into Asia. This opened the door between maritime trade between European people and Asian people, and helped establish permanent links between the world's various regions. So now Europe is plugged into the Indian Ocean basin, and with the absence of the Chinese, they are able to come in and dominate. So the Portuguese trading posts were designed not to conquer territory, but to control trade routes by forcing merchant vessels to stop and pay duties. Taxes, that would be, not the other duty. So by the mid-16th century, 1550s or so, 1540s, 50s, 60s, the Portuguese merchants had built more than 50 trading posts between West Africa and East Asia. So they established these trading posts on the coast. They didn't really go further inland. They weren't conquering territory again. They just had trading posts out there. And again, the rule of history, the more you trade, the richer you get. So, now, there's a man who is very responsible for a lot of this, and this would be Afonso de Albuquerque, and he led the effort seizing Hormuz in 1508, also Gao in 1510, and Malacca in 1511. And these are all very important trading post cities in the Indian Ocean basin. And so Hormuz in 1508, Gao in 1510, and Malacca in 1511. And from these strategic sites, Albuquerque tried to control trade throughout the Indian Ocean basin. Now he was only partially successful because they didn't have enough ships. There weren't as many Portuguese ships, nowhere near as many Portuguese ships as Zheng He and the Chinese had when they did this about 80 years earlier. And eventually what happens is the English and the Dutch follow the Portuguese in, and they come in and they're able to take over the Portuguese trading sites, almost all of them, and they come in and eventually start taking over more territory. But the Portuguese really get the ball rolling on this one, and they establish the trade link from old Portugal around Africa into the Indian Ocean basin, which brings Europe into this trade route in the Indian Ocean basin, which has been a rich trading route for hundreds and hundreds of years before this, and now Europe is plugged in, which will lead to a big advancement for Europe. All right, let's talk about Columbus. And what we're going to do now is we have a documentary that you can watch on Columbus. You can click on the link there. It's also on my blog. So we'll watch that. And what we'll do in classes, if you missed this and are watching this right now, is what we're going to do is I want you to write down what you knew about Columbus or what you already know about Columbus. And then I want you to watch the video, and I want you to write down what is new. In class, we will be comparing and casing with this. So watch the video, and there's 2 different times you can watch on there. And I can also link that below on the blog, on this YouTube video. So look down in the comments, and I can link the video. I'll link the video right there, too. All right. So now that you've watched the video, let's talk about what the Columbian Exchange is. So, the Columbian Exchange. First, we're going to start off talking about, again, millions of years ago, the continental drift carried the old world from the new world. So if we go way back, all the continents were connected, and it was called Pangea. All the continents were connected millions of years ago. Then what happened was the continents basically, they separated. And when the continents separated, this fostered divergent or different evolution. For instance, the development of rattlesnakes happened on one side of the Atlantic and vipers on the other. So here's basically the deal. You had the continents were connected. They split apart. And the animals formed differently on different continents because they were no longer connected. So snakes, for example, you had in Europe and Africa snakes called vipers. However, in the Americas, they were rattlesnakes. They actually were, the belief is that they were originally the same snake, but because they lived in different environments, they developed differently. So, we have different animals, different plants on different continents. And this is the way it is for most of human history, almost all of human history. All the way from the first people, all the way up till 1492. And in 1492, things change. There is the reestablishment of connections between what would be called the Old and New World. Now, when we say Old World, we're thinking Europe, Africa, Asia. New World is North and South America. That's a Eurocentric term coming from the Europeans, what they view as the Old World, their world, and a New World as the Americas. Columbian Exchange is named after Columbus because he was the first person from Europe who sailed, first person who sailed from Europe in this era in 1492, came to the Americas, and then began this big exchange right after him. So when the Europeans, like Columbus, when they came to the Americas, old world crops such as wheat, barley, rice, and turnips had never been in America. And new world crops such as corn or maize, white potatoes, sweet potatoes, had not traveled to Europe. In America, there were no horses, cattle, sheep, or goats. And the only the animals that were in the Americas were like the llama, the alpaca, the dog, the guinea pig. And there was no equivalent of domesticated animals in the old world. This is going to be real important. The new world doesn't have animals like cows, animals like sheep. There are not these animals that you can reproduce quickly and eat for food the same way there is in the old world. There's not animals that you can tie to a plow to turn the soil, which means in the Americas, all this work has to be done by people. So there's no beast of burden, we call them. Animals that will help you do your farm work. So, no horses, no mules and such that are in the old world are not in the new world. And so there's food, there's animals, and disease is the big one. The old world's dense populations of humans and a lot of their diseases came from animals like chicken, cattle, rats. We had talked about the Black Plague, for example. These diseases plagued the old world and killed a lot of people. They were not in the new world. So the diseases that come from the old world to the new world wipe out a large percent of the native population. These germs wipe out as many as up to 90% of the native populations by some estimates. Anywhere from 50 to 90% of native populations die with diseases from the old world, like smallpox is the big one. Now, cattle and horses, when they come to the New World, they spread like crazy. Horses spread all over, cattle spread, and the Europeans basically used these to become stronger. So in all these exchanges, pretty much in the Columbian Exchange, the Europeans gain on almost everything. They give diseases to the natives. They're able to bring over their old crops and old animals and grow them in the New World, and able to take the crops from the old world, the New World, the Americas, and use them as well. Well, let's talk about germs, for example. Now, there was a colony in Virginia called Roanoke. Roanoke in the 1580s was first established by the English, and this colony didn't make it. The people died out. However, we don't know why. It's a mystery why Roanoke went away. We don't know if people joined the natives. We don't know if they were died or wiped out. We just really don't know. However, in their accounts, they were writing about how the native people began to die quickly of this disease. When the Pilgrims come into Plymouth, Massachusetts in North America, they do so, and they are writing about how thousands had died in the Great Plague not long since. And a pity it was to see so many good fields so well seeded and without man to dress and manure the same. So basically, like there were these fields that natives had, there were all these places the natives had, but they were dying and they were empty because so many had died of smallpox. So smallpox was the worst and most spectacular of the infectious diseases for the Native Americans. The first recorded epidemic of this disease was in British North America in the 1630s. One colonist in Plymouth Plantation, one of the European settlements in the Americas, wrote that the victims fell down so gently of this disease that they were not able to help one another out. Not to make a fire, to fetch little water to drink, nor to bury any dead. And the missionaries and traders who went further into the America told the same story about smallpox and the large number of peoples who died. In 1738, the epidemic destroyed half the Cherokee Nation. In 1759, nearly half the Catawbas. The first centuries, nearly two-thirds, and then also passing on, 2/3 of the Omahas die, and perhaps the entire population between the Missouri River and New Mexico. So everywhere the Europeans go as they come further into the Americas, the natives keep dying because of this disease, smallpox, which affects the population and basically wipes the land out for them so the Europeans are able to come in and colonize the Americas. So one way to think about the Columbian Exchange is that the Europeans pretty much benefit on all sides. They benefit because they're able to take a lot of their old crops that they had, like crops and animals, like livestock. They're able to bring in wheat. They're able to bring in sugarcane, bananas, and grapes into the New World and grow them and make a lot of money off them. They're able to take the new crops like tobacco, potatoes, corn. They're able also to grow those and get those ideas from the native people and grow them and profit off them as they're taking the land, because so many people are dying of the diseases, which allows them to way too easily be able to defeat the native people, because how do you have a resistance when up to 90% of your population is dying? So I compare this to the Silk Road sometimes. The Silk Road, there was diseases that spread in the Silk Road too, especially the Black Plague. But however, in the Silk Road, it was more mutual. It was mutual beneficial. The Muslims who were on the Silk Road benefited a lot. The Chinese benefited. Even when we talk about the Afro-Eurasian Trade Network, everyone was benefiting, and it was mutually beneficial to most parties involved, with the acceptance of the diseases that came, which did affect the Europeans greatly. However, the Europeans were still able to benefit out of a lot of this trade, because they were able to get a lot of new products in, which caused the Renaissance. The Columbian Exchange is completely one-sided. The Europeans benefit completely from this one, because they're able to use their old crops, take the new ones, and animals and crops, and the diseases are so one-sided that they end up wiping out the native population, and the Europeans are able to come in and then settle and take over the land.